I'm here today with Andy Wells. Andy is the author of a new book titled Tried to Be Straight, Options for Gay Christians. Andy holds a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics from Biola University. His education, coupled with his life experience struggling to reconcile his faith and sexuality, lend credibility to his writing. Andy's passion for the topics of sexuality and faith come from his struggle with self-acceptance. He knows the frustration of living as a secretly gay man and a publicly born-again Christian. Finding a solution that works without having to abandon one's faith is Andy's desire in helping others facing the same dilemma. So Andy, congratulations on this new book, and thanks very much for joining us. I'm anxious to learn more about your experience with it.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
So before we get into the book itself, maybe you could share with folks a little bit more about your background than what I briefly touched on.
Sure. The fastest I go through it is I grew up in a church that was extremely liberal and extremely accepting of gays. In fact, they were performing gay wedding ceremonies in the mid 70s. Their
Wow.
liberal positions and their left positions led to them being firebombed during that decade as well. And then in my mid 20s, I became a born again Christian. And in my and it was interesting because I hadn't really figured out what to do with the sexuality part. I just, as a born again Christian and going across the freeway to a much more conservative church, I knew that we believed that was wrong. And so I went through some reparative therapy, conversion therapy type treatment, and that didn't work. And then I started drinking. So in my 20s, I became a born again Christian. In my 30s, I became sober. In my 40s, I came out. And in my 50s, I wrote a book about it.
Wow. What a saga.
Yep.
It's unfortunate that those are long time periods.
Yes.
Between each step.
Well, I think the nice thing about writing it down and writing the lessons that I learned over those decades is that you can skip the 10 years in between each step if you'd like. You can learn from me and you can take what helps you and leave the rest behind. And
well, it had to be painful.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, that's just what I'm thinking. I mean,
it was extremely painful. Every step was painful, and I don't wish the pain on people. I wish that they can learn and benefit without having to experience quite as much pain.
Yeah, well, I think, between your book and, other things that are going on in the world at large, hopefully that's the case. So in any event, let's get to the book. Other than what you just said, is that the main motivation for writing it?
I had arrived at a place in my life where I was okay with with myself. I was okay with my faith. I had found a church that fully affirmed me and fully affirmed all the parts of me without compromising their focus on the Bible or Jesus. And I was quite happy with that. And one night, it was a Christmas party. I went out to catch some fresh air on the balcony, and there was a woman who we started talking together, and I'd never met her before, but she shared with me when things got to talking about church, she shared with me about her son who, when he was 12, came out. And he told her, but they didn't know what to do because they were a member of a church that was not affirming, not accepting of gay people. It was a sin. And so they weren't sure what to do. So at that point in time, her son was then 20 at the time I talked with her, and she was working with a book about celibacy. So she said some guy wrote a book about celibacy, and so that's what that's the approach we're trying right now. And I said, look, celibacy might work for that guy, and that's probably why that guy wrote a book, but it doesn't work for a lot of people. And I've tried it. I tried celibacy. And so we got to talking, and I realized during the conversation that I had a lot to bring to the table with respect to what the Bible teaches and what the Christian faith really believes with respect to the gospel and being gay and all these other things. on my way home, I thought about what it must have been like for that 12-year-old, because I came out in my 40s. You know, I had tools that a 12-year-old doesn't have. And I started crying.
Hmm.
And so for the people who are facing this struggle and haven't gotten as far down the path as I have, maybe I could write something that would help them. And that's when I decided to write the book.
Wow. Well, good for you. Good for you. How would you say it differs from other books that are, you know, similar in nature in terms of topic?
Yeah, I I would say, and other authors that would be in the category of what do you do as a Christian, and you know, people like Amber Cantorna come to mind, Mel White, of course,
Right.
Colby Martin, Matthew Vines, Justin Lee, and I don't have quite the sophistication and the education to talk about the original Greek and Hebrew that those folks do. But what I do is I complement it. So I have a chapter, instead of saying this is what the Bible teaches, I have a chapter on hermeneutics, which is the art and science of biblical interpretation. And so my goal is to equip people who are facing this challenge with a means to evaluate the arguments that are made by others, rather than just telling them what they need to believe. And then at the end of the chapter, I say, look, you might still believe that being gay is a sin, even after all of this. And that's fine. You need an answer. So I leave it open for each, you know, on the chapter on celibacy, I leave it open. I say, okay, I'm not a big fan of celibacy myself, and I don't practice it, but you might be. And here's some tips, and here's some authors, and here's what people have said. I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about conversion therapy as a solution, but because it has a bit more of a sordid past. I think really this book is written not to change the view of a church, not to change the view of a person, not to change, not to be a political argument or a theological argument. It's to give the individual who is making a decision about what to do with their faith and their sexuality some tools to use so that they can make it as informed as possible. And I think that's where this book complements the other books, and it doesn't compete. It doesn't compete. It doesn't replace. It really complements. I think the other thing that makes the book unique is I speak in a conservative voice. So rather than quoting, you know, a theologian that would be very affirming like Shelby Spong, I quote Billy Graham. I quote Jerry Falwell. I quote John MacArthur. You know, and so it's because of my background. When I was a conservative trying to figure out what to do with all the guys I was dating, I wouldn't listen to a Shelby Spong. I'd listen to Billy Graham. I'd listen to a Jerry Falwell, but I wouldn't listen to a Shelby Spong. So using that, and I've gotten some criticism on both sides of the road for that, but I really think the people that I'm trying to reach, I think it'll resonate with.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So there's a chapter in the book on conversion therapy, and you talk about the different forms of treatment. What's the difference between those different forms?
I think there's very little that has changed from when the Christian conversion therapy movement began in the mid-1970s. And it began shortly after the American Psychological Association removed homosexuality as a diagnosis from their DSM-4 manual of diagnoses. So shortly after that, you started seeing ex-gay ministries starting up. And that's when Exodus International was born, and others. So over time, what happens is some wackiness gets exposed. So they repackage, change the name, and put the same strategies forward under a different name. Wow. So you had conversion therapy, but then no one wanted to be a conversion therapist because it got a bad name. And then it was reparative therapy. And then that ended up getting a bad name because somebody exposed what they actually do, which is ridiculous stuff. I mean, it's if you look at the Truth Wins Out website, they really do a good job of showing what goes on in these types of, they call it sexual orientation change efforts. Anything to try to not be gay. So so they've abandoned all hope of ever being straight. I don't know of one ministry or organization that says you can be straight, but they say it's possible to not be gay anymore. But it's crazy. Some of the organizations still do like male cuddle sessions. Like, you're going to make me straight by having me cuddle with another guy.
Wow.
And that still goes on. That lunacy still goes on.
Hmm.
So that's where I think there hasn't been a change. Don't be fooled by the fact that people say that they don't do conversion therapy. They say they don't do reparative. Now the organization that used to call themselves the National Alliance on the Research and Treatment for Homosexuality, NARTH, they now call themselves the Alliance for Choice. And they've changed it to reintegrative therapy. And it really is, it's just a repackaging. And there's a saying in the South talking about putting lipstick on a pig, and that's really what they're doing. They're just putting a new set of clothes on an old set of treatments.
One of my former bosses used to use that term, which didn't endear him everywhere, but surprisingly. Anyway, so you've studied this area obviously a lot. What would you say to people that's the most compelling argument that you found, that should convince people that it's okay to be gay and Christian?
Yeah. And, first, before I go into the answer there, and it's a really good question, because a lot of people ask me, I'm doing a lot of advertising on Facebook and a lot of the questions. So what's the bottom line? And I want to tell them I wrote a 160-page book. That's the bottom line. You want me to put it in a paragraph? But I just use the term gay because LGBTQIAA plus, and the list keeps getting longer. And it's important that I be able to relate to people on their level with their terms, but it's also impossible. So I use the term gay. So if you're same-sex attracted, please, you just have to do a little, if you consider yourself same-sex attracted, you just have to do a little translation in your head when I use the term gay. But I just use the term gay for this all-encompassing term. And what's the most compelling argument that it's okay? The most compelling argument to me is that every single alternative option and approach that the Christian community has offered Christians who love Jesus and experience these desires has a horrifically terrible track record. I won't even call it a record of success because even in the area of conversion therapy, it's been almost 50 years and we have no reliable study that shows any track record at all.
Wow.
It's unmeasurable. In 12-step programs, there have been studies that have come out that say that 5% of the people that walk into an AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous, make it to 5 years sober. Okay, that's a measurable result. It's abysmal, but even with a 5% measurable result, it's still a lot of people get sent there by their doctors and by the court system and all that. But think about it. That's okay, but we haven't been able to measure the success in conversion therapy. Celibacy has, people have talked about it as, we'll just be celibate. That's simple. Hey, I'm a guy and I want to date multiple women, but I don't. I control myself there. Well, the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians, if you burn with passion, then go get married. Well, that's an option for everybody except for an LGBTQ person, according to the people that believe it's wrong. Well, those people, unsurprisingly, fail miserably at celibacy. Some people do great at it, but it's a very small number. So is this faith? I mean, I worship the creator of the universe. Is the creator of the universe only capable of what Alan Chambers, the former president of Exodus International, the largest, longest running ex-gay organization and ministry in the world, Alan Chambers said they had a 99.9% failure rate. 99.9% failure rate. So does my God have a 0.1% success rate when earnest people seek him? No, no. So if it does, so I don't look to what works as being true, but if it doesn't work, then your position isn't true and you ought to go back and rethink it.
Very good. I never heard that line, thinking that well said before. So thank you.
Thank you.
So there's lots of interesting things in the book. One of them is that you mentioned Heidi Fleiss.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I was a new believer, and a friend of mine and I were walking through Old Pasadena, and it was that area had been revitalized. You can see the Rose Parade every year. This section of Colorado Boulevard is on the Rose Parade on television every year, and Heidi Fleiss was Hollywood's madam, and she was on trial in the mid 90s for pandering and pimping and prostitution. And so she had set up underwear stores to sell her underwear to make money so that she could pay her legal fees, because they wouldn't let her use all the money that she made for collecting from the prostitution that she ran. And she had this little black book that, this is why she was on the news, the little black book that had all the big time Hollywood names in it, her clients. And so what would those names get released or would they not? And it was this big suspense. And so here she was one night, we go walking past and we realize that Heidi is in there behind the counter signing boxers. And so we sat in line, and instead of buying a pair of boxers, and this is not to my credit, because she was there to sell things and we were there to tell her about Jesus, but we handed her a Bible tract and said, Jesus loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. And all the excitement that was racing through my mind as a person who hadn't dealt with his sexuality came into play while we were waiting for that opportunity. And Heidi Fleiss, I have to say, was a very gracious person and responded really gently to us. She could have said something very sharp, but she didn't. So that was to her credit. Yeah. But I open up the book with that story. I think it's a fun one. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Mike Rosebush wrote the foreword to the book, and he was formerly vice president of Focus on the Family. So can you tell us a little bit about him and his story?
Yeah. I have come to be great friends with Mike, and and here's how it happened. In the process of getting ready to release the book, I wanted to develop a following as much as I could. And so I was writing articles on medium.com, which is a story website. You can put stories up and then people can follow you and you can follow other people. And it's been a good avenue for me. So I got a message one day from Mike Rosebush, and he wanted to ask me some questions about, and I didn't know him from anybody. So I thought, well, geez, do I have time to do a Zoom conversation with everybody that likes my writing? And then the next thought into my mind was, dude, you have one person asking for a conversation about your writing. Let's do it. So we set up a Zoom for later that afternoon, and I learned he started talking about himself, and he's a former high school and college football player, Air Force Academy graduate, graduated very highly in the Air Force Academy, former fighter pilot, F-4 Phantom fighter pilot. And I've been a pilot for a long time, so I love aviation. And so the minute he said that, I was all of a sudden I was his fanboy instead of him being mine. And then while he was flying in the Air Force, he got his PhD in counseling, and he went to work he's never done conversion therapy, but he has done therapy for Christian men who struggled with homosexuality. What got him in trouble was the fact that he spoke at a NARTH conference, and he made two statements at the beginning of his talk. He had just published a book on his techniques with, dealing with gay men, and this is what they do. He says, let's just get two assumptions. Let's just get two assumptions straight. First is we don't know why people are gay. And that went over like a lead balloon in this room. And then he said the second thing is that conversion therapy doesn't turn anybody straight. Well, that was not well received either. So the next day he lost his connections. He was a director on Exodus International for professional counselors. He was the director of that program to connect. And he was also a connection at Narth. Because they believe that, you have a bad relationship with your parents. And so that's what makes you gay, or at least at the time they believed that. And they've backpedaled on all these things because they've turned out to be nonsense. But they were the operating theories of the day. So he told me that story. He told me the story about being married to his wife before he figured out that he was gay. He figured out he was gay in his mid-30s. So he stayed married to her. What impressed me about Mike was that he was given the opportunity to leave his wife on multiple occasions, and he stayed with her. And he became a widower in 2017. He's now openly gay. He's out. He's dating. He's and all the things I'm saying he's posted online. So I'm not like outing him or anything like that. He's writing on Medium now, and so I appreciate his integrity. I appreciate he is the kindest man I've met. He is so soft when it comes to just love and kindness. That when I need to, and kindness is not my biggest strength. I value it, but it's not my biggest strength. Compassion is my biggest strength. So when I need some kindness in my life, I just call him.
Wonderful. Well, yeah. Good for you. Good for him.
Yeah.
So you and I separately have talked about the challenges associated with Facebook marketing, and in particular when it comes to gay LGBT related issues. So what's your experience look like?
So a little background that goes into my Facebook marketing. So we released the book in the beginning of September. I started the Facebook marketing about 2 weeks into September, maybe 3. I have a Facebook ads manager who put together 16 different ads in this thing called a funnel. And so you start developing relationships with people, and then you're driving them to, finally say, hey, buy my book. It's, hey, here's a good thought, and here's another good thought, and here's another good thought. And then finally it's buy my book. So with this, my target is conservative Christians. And it's hard to get conservative Christians who are secretly gay. It's hard to dial in Facebook to get those.
Sure.
And so I'm getting lots of conservative Christians. And so day one, my ad went out. And, now you and I both know Stan Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Mitchell is a pastor in Nashville, Tennessee, who led his church to become accepting of LGBTQ people several years ago. And Stan talks about a spectrum of 1 to 10, 1 being completely in the closet, unaccepting, unaffirming, even of yourself or anyone like you, and 10 being completely out of the closet and completely fine with all of your sexuality and everything. And so on that spectrum, I'm really targeting the 1 to a 3.
Wow.
I'm really targeting close to that 1 to 3. So I'm getting a lot of flack. I am getting called names all day, every day. Things like false prophet, heretic. People are very nice to explain to me that I'm going to be going to hell if I don't repent and stop sinning. People suggest that I read the Bible. I have a master's degree from a Bible college, but people are, have you read this verse? It's like, yeah, I wrote a book about gays and Christians, and there's only 6 verses that are even thought to talk about it. Right. So yeah, I've read that verse. So a couple strategies came to mind. The first one was ignore them all. And so I had a long drive to think about this. And I thought, number one, I'm missing an opportunity. And number two, I'm not being respectful of the people who are taking the time to read and comment on the posts that I'm making. And so then I thought, well, how do I do this? Do I argue? Do I tell them that they're wrong? And then, and then I'm thinking about the person that's not engaged in that public conversation between this person that calls me a heretic and this person and me. And they're going to look at it. And what are they going to come away with? Oh, look, two jerks arguing, and the other person, they can think they're a jerk all day long. But if they think I'm a jerk, they're never going to touch my book. And then maybe the help and the hope that my book offers won't get delivered because I didn't show up in a way that was inviting. So what did I do? I called Mike because I needed to be kind, and kindness isn't the top of my strength list, but kindness is at the top of Mike's strength list. He has a PhD in it. So I have a master's degree in arguing to get my way, Christian apologetics, arguing that I'm right. So I called Mike and I said, you're getting a lot of flack. How are you responding? And he shared a few things with me and we just talked for about an hour, and most of it was just about other things. And I had filled up my kindness tank and I was able to go to work. And so I start every response with thanking the person for responding and taking the time. And then at the end, I also thank them again. And then if their response was at all gentle or at all gracious or at all not hateful, then I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that, hey, look, we disagree. But I really appreciate the fact that you did it in a way that was loving and kind. And then what I always try to do is I acknowledge that the view that they're espousing is what many Christians believe and that many Christians would teach. And then what I try to do is try to draw some compassion for the people I'm trying to reach. The people I'm trying to reach have tried that. The people I'm trying to reach have beaten their heads against the walls. They're earnest. They're faithful. They really do love Jesus. And the message of just don't be gay hasn't worked for them. And so now what? And that's who I'm really, and then I'll acknowledge, hey, this book probably isn't for you. It's probably not for a lot of people, but for the people it is for, I hope it offers them some hope. And so depending on what they're talking about, I really try not to go toe to toe with anybody. I try to acknowledge them and their position and then come across with something that will talk about who I really am trying to reach and why.
Well, good for you. Good for you. Well, you've got more ability to do that than I do. That's for sure.
It's hard. I will tell you that I have to turn off Facebook notifications. So that I don't get distracted by them during the day. I have to set aside a period of time to do it, and I have to be in the right mind. And if I'm not in the right mindset, I put it off because it does drag me down. It grates on me. It gets old. Especially when it's some of these things have 50, 60, 70, 80 comments.
Wow.
And half of them are the same comment using a little bit different words. So it's just over and over and over. And I can't respond like I'm responding to the same person the 70th time. I have to respond each time like it's the first time. And it's not easy to do. So I just have to be easy on myself.
Yeah, really. Really. Totally can see that. Goodness sakes. So where do you see taking your effort from here? I know you're still in the early stages of just having launched a book. Are you going to do more books? Are you going to do other kinds of projects or initiatives in this area? Or what are your thoughts?
I would like to do another book. I'm thinking about, some feedback I got from a parent of an LGBTQ teenager was he liked what I had to say about dating and sex and relationships. And he wished I had provided more on that. And so I thought, I want to write another book. I enjoyed the process of writing. I enjoyed thinking and praying about the people who I was trying to reach with a message of love and hope. I want to keep doing that. So I think that might be my next book is And I don't know whether it'll just be relationships in general, or if I'm going to just say, how to gay it up with the Bible. I don't know, but a biblical look at relationships that aren't necessarily lauded today would be a fun project.
Very cool. Well, good for you. Well, congratulations on all the work that you're doing. I mean, it's a, you're on a mission from God, you know what I mean? And you're like really so altruistic about it. It's just your interest is clearly just trying to help people that are struggling with, what you had to struggle with or other people had to struggle with. And so, good for you for, doing nothing other than trying to help. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's keeping my eye on the ball is really the key right now. And so I'm reaching out to people to try to get speaking engagements and any kind of book signings. Zoom has been a great resource. I'm doing webinars on I did my first webinar the other day on answering anti-LGBT argument or claims from the Bible. And it was very well received. So I'm going to keep doing that one. I'm going to develop another one on my next webinar is going to be on choosing a church as an LGBT person, and what to look for and what it means and why even go to church. Why is that even important for a Christian? And then, just keep going through and finding ways to make connections with people and make relationships with people and keep going in that direction. And, the book will sell itself, but if I keep making the meaningful connections and meaningful relationships, I think everything will work out the way that it's supposed to. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're really wise in that you're realizing the book is not the only avenue of communication to help people, right? You're doing the podcast, you're doing the webinars, you're doing, several different avenues of communication, all of which are, effective to different people, different ways. So, why just limit it to one, right? I mean, it's really wise to branch out like that. So I'm glad to hear that.
It's interesting. A lot of people will say something and I'll resist the urge to say, just read my book.
Yeah, I know. I hear some people say that too, it's like, but anyway, so what's the website address for people to go to?
It's triedtobestraight.com.
Okay, great. Yep. That's straightforward enough. Good.
Right.
Well,
and you can get everything off of there. It's also the book's available on Amazon, on Kindle, and in paperback at this point. I'm going to come out with an audio book, it probably in a month or two, as soon as I can get to reading it.
Well, that'll take some time, but you've got a very good voice for it. So I think that'll be well received too. Well, Andy, thanks again for joining us. Congratulations on your book and all your fine work. And please, keep us posted on things.
Thanks, Brian.